So the big composter here, it gets turned once every couple of days. You can see, if you look real close, how we get a lot of little roly-poly, smushy parts in here because of how wet it gets. You can see up here on the lid, all kinds of excess moisture. Um, it's from ventilation holes that were drilled in this composter before I got it. So one of the unfortunate sides of buying used, but you can still see there's still a lot of paper and cardboard. A lot of paper and cardboard product broke down. You can see very wet, but then again, we still have snow on the ground out here. So this this bin is about a third of the way done. You can see it is pretty welly processed, but it is still very wet. I will probably let this bin go a little bit longer because this was the start of a winter bin. It needs more material in it to dry it out, and then hopefully use the sun to dry out the rest between tumblings. Well, that's about it for this big composter. Okay, and so here we have the small composter. Notice it's two compartments. Well, because I am going for volume here, I kind of have some holes on every side of this centerpiece cut out, just so I get a good mixture. It helps break up this bigger particulate. And it's just coffee, cardboard, paper, and leaves. It's a very simple, easy to do mix. Anyone can do it. Most people have this stuff right there in their homes. I make a lot of excesses, but I also use a couple of companies to get excess coffee for this purpose. It also helps to have it on hand to help feed the worms. But this little guy is 40 gallons. The other one is 80. I make 120 gallons every 90 days. I offset them so I can make some here, make some there. That way I'm always rotating stocks. But after that, it's on to the bait bucket. Okay, so here we go. I already dropped a couple of specks in here. You can't see. Got a couple of smaller juvenile red wigglers crawling around in here. Just two of them. If this one will stop being so camera shy. There you go. But today we're going to talk about building a new worm tote, new bin, whatever your hopes and dreams may want. So you're going to need a couple of things. One, you're going to need some bedding. Some people like cardboard, some people like leaves, some people like paper. I like to do a small mix. It's shredded paper, shredded cardboard. As you can see, if I can get you a good representative, tiny in particle size. This is just stuff that I've shredded from home. I have a small shredder. I spent $100 on it. Nothing fancy. It just makes this stuff process that much faster. So to start it, I'm going to take this bedding, as people call it, and I'm going to cover as much of the bottom surface here as I can. I know I kind of covered up the stars of the attraction, the worms. Don't worry, we have plenty more of them to add when we start adding our food source and then our top cover a little bit later. So now that I got this kind of nice little layer of bedding sprinkled all the way around, making sure I've covered up almost all of the black on the bottom. I'm going to just kind of make sure I have an even spread, nothing too fancy. Most people have their stuff pre-wet down, so there's nothing really fancy about my way. I just kind of come over and I give it a nice misting. Now I do this because I keep my materials on the drier side when I'm keeping them in bulk storage. Then I'll add something like this bait bucket here that I showed you a little bit earlier into the mix. And that's going to have a lot of food. And when you're making a compost like this, whether you're making straight vermicast or you're making compost because you need a pre-compost, a manure, or whatever, you don't really need a lot of water to start because you can get your water from the food source, like this bait bucket. You'll be able to see that this material is already fairly wet from all the excess moisture because I put a lid on it to make it only have one capable direction of going. And as this stuff decomposed, you know, there's a whole bunch more moisture being let off, and next thing you know, you got a little bit of maybe some fermentation going on in there. You come up with this really kind of gooey, slimy mess that you start out with, and then you kind of turn it into a drying process as the worms go through it. You add more and more brown process in my area to dry out your green process. So what I've done here is I've emptied all the contents out of the bait bucket. You can see right here in this nice grouping of food that I'm about to drop in front of you that we got just Worms Central right there. They're all after all that bacteria all over the rotting material. So what we'll do is we'll kind of, if I can get this display back up, get everything mixed in over the top here. You know, spread your worms out. And this is why I wear gloves, because you are handling bacteria, and if you got any little nicks and cuts, you're talking about infections, any kind of hazardous stuff that could be not quite killed off in a material. And then I got this wet layer on top. I'm going to come back over, just cover it up with some paper and cardboard. That way, it's a little bit more difficult for any kind of pests to get in here. You know, the worms kind of have their own layer, nice and tight packed in here. We I gave it a little bit of moisture underneath. Nothing fancy. Come back over. Make sure we lock everything in. Now, a lot of people would say, don't use this, you know. The stuff's going to mat, it's going to get stuck. You know, the worms aren't going to be able to move. Well, I have been doing this for a little more than half a year, and I would say that, yes, it does mat down. It does compact, and it does make it a little bit difficult to harvest, especially when you get it wet, really wet like this stuff was. But what I've done is I have learned that to do this, you dry it out first. After you get this ultra moisture, you kind of lock it in with a layer of dryness, add another layer of moisture on top, sink down more, then you kind of let it sit and dry out. This will keep any kind of pests from getting down in here. You know, they got to work a lot harder to bury through this, and then they're going to have to expend that much more energy to find processed stuff, lay their eggs, and then find a way to escape possibly and redo it over again. I seal these guys in on top with a nice little misting. It'll keep all my paper product in place. Give my worms a nice layer of moisture to work with down below. And now you don't have to sit here and worry about anything other than what are they going to eat next? Because that was quite a bit of worms. I'd say easily that there was probably a good pound in there. And those were mostly juveniles. I only saw a couple of good-sized adults. So to counteract that, I don't want them to starve on mostly already processed material. So I give them a nice heat layer, because these bins, while they are shallow, they don't hold a lot of heat. They're durable, decently thick, but they don't hold the heat. So I will take this kind of moist coffee grounds that I have here, give it a nice layer on top. Coffee is my biggest staple for the worms. One, it's one of the most thrown away products in the world. Everybody doesn't know what to do with their coffee grounds. I was working with a company local to the area up until about a month ago, collecting their waste coffee. And just in the, I'd say half a year that I was collecting their coffee, using it for compost, I was able to take away something like 45, 50 5-gallon buckets full of this coffee. So if you notice, my coffee's a little bit compacted and compressed, so I have to dig it out. And I like to make sure I break up as much of it as possible, because the coffee does tend to clump. And it will dry out in the center, and the worms will just come by and scoop the sides, and then you get these nice kind of hard particles that you don't know what to do with, and you just got to kind of reach in and break them up. So I'll get a nice kind of fermented, smelly layer of coffee grounds here. Now that I got coffee grounds all good and done, we'll come back and give it a nice wet texture. So you get that kind of drainage that'll pass through and it'll sink onto the paper here and the cardboard, and then that will make a compost-like reaction to give us a nice little bit of heat, and that'll keep this whole bin warm during these cooler months that I've been experiencing, as you saw the snow outside. And I'll cover all this coffee up with the rest of the paper I have in this bucket. We'll just go ahead and dump it on down. That way we can do some more paper shredding tonight. Never ever run out of cardboard or paper, because there's always somebody who's looking to throw it away. Now that I got a nice covering on it, not quite done yet, but I like to take a look and see if I have a section pre-cut already, or if I'm going to need to cut a section. And yeah, it does. It looks like I'm going to have to cut a section. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bag and I'll open it up here in a minute, and I'll put you guys on hold while I cut this bag open, and I'll do it to kind of match the whole dimensions of this bin, and then we'll put a piece of cardboard on top of that to help lock in moisture. And once I have that all set up, I'm going to cover this whole top layer with dry leaves, and that will be my finished breeding bin. Take that bin, set it up into production. Next thing I know, 120 days go by. We'll keep an eye on all these. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the ones that I've already started, so you can kind of get a look at how dry they are, the kind of things that are going on. We'll get them some food, and then maybe I'll pull down a couple of other bins and see if they're ready for food or not. See you in a minute. Okay, now that we're back, I will get the last layer going here with some leaves to finish off, and apparently some pine cones and plastic garbage as well. No, jokingly, you do unwillingly pick up certain materials when harvesting from areas where you can't control wind movement. But if you notice, I kind of base all my pile right here in this centralized area. I leave about 1.5 inches, 2 inches border all around my material to kind of keep the worms a dry zone on top, so they're not trying to crawl out. Now, it doesn't help that I have lights over their heads for a better part of their day. But that is how you can start your first worm bin. And so, now that you've got your leaf layer on, you want something to kind of give the paper something to stick to, because you're going to put a little layer of either thin layer of cardboard, or I've got a couple of paper bags that I wanted to try out just to see which works better, but something to kind of stick to either way. I always like to just add that last little bit of moisture on top. It helps make stuff stick. That'll create kind of a barrier as well to help keep the insects back, because if you do this correctly, you will unwillingly or undoubtingly somehow lure a host of good bugs into the area where you were possibly doing this. So I always like to try and keep it a little prepared by deterring them as best possible. Now, unfortunately, I kind of cut this paper bag wrong first time around. So now that I have it all stuck down, I can take this little piece of cardboard that was a leftover from cutting out some stuff and use that as a weight to help this seal up all the way around. Now your paper bag has a nice little water layer to stick itself to. It'll start to stick to the plastic. The weight of this layer of cardboard on top will help kind of focus it down, and then there you go. That's your first worm tub. This is 11 gallons of material. You fill it all the way up here to this edge, you can get 11 gallons of your material in here. You do 2 of these, that is more than enough for a season of gardening. Very simple. I found these at Home Depot for $5.75. Very cheap in my area. I plan to invest in these. You can build shelves that are perfectly fitted all around them. They sell shelves that actually are meant for paper and things, but they will hold the weight of these. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one up there, and then I will bring the first one down, and we'll kind of start to dissect and see what's going on with the first one, since they've had about a month now almost to kind of settle in. We'll see what they have going on. I'll see you back here in a few minutes.